My name is Karen. I'm a housewife who married into a farming family. Having been married to Michael for 20 years, my days are filled with farm work and household chores from dawn till dusk, but it's not all that bad. Hey, Karen. This soup stock, you used instant powder, didn't you? You should be making the stock from scratch. Seriously, Karen has a talent for making awful meals. The sarcasm from my mother-in-law, Dorothy, and Michael pales in comparison to the busyness of farm work and chores. I'm amazed at how they can find the energy to complain about the soup I make every day. Ugh. This is so bad, I'm throwing it away. Hey, Dorothy. Dorothy ends up throwing the soup she and Michael were eating into the kitchen sink. It's been 20 years of marriage. This kind of harassment is an everyday occurrence. Still, there's a reason why I don't divorce Michael. Grandma, that's a bit too much. In the kitchen, our daughter, Grace, spoke up to Dorothy. Grace is 17 years old this year. She's mine and Michael's child. Grace, I can't let you eat such lazy cooking. Understand that? Yeah, right. Mom, come here for a sec. Grace. What, you're going to ignore your grandma? Ignoring Dorothy, Grace took me out to the hallway. And then, she said, we should leave this place. But, this is your home too. Not this again. Forget it, I'm going to school. What about breakfast? I don't want to eat with those people. With that, Grace stormed off to her room upstairs. It seems Grace is not satisfied with my response. What should I do? Gazing at the stairs, all I could do was mutter to myself. I think it's best for Grace if we manage to get along in this house. But, a few days later, an incident occurred. I need to talk. I might be sick. A few days later, I told Michael. I had received a notice for a re-examination after a cancer screening. Oh, that might be for the best. What? Is he actually happy that his wife might be sick? Then, with a smirk, Michael showed me an image on his phone. It was a picture of Michael embracing a young woman, both in a compromising state. Michael, is this? Well, it's what you'd call an affair in society. She's young and cute, right? What are you talking about? That's disgusting. I couldn't help but shout in response to Michael's words. What? You got a problem with it? But this is. If you have a problem, we're getting a divorce. Get out. Ouch. Michael pushed me away and hurled insults at me. Michael. Forgetting the grace of being supported by this household. It's common sense for a wife to turn a blind eye to her husband's affairs. But an affair is a clear act of infidelity. It's your fault for not being attractive. Michael firmly retorted to my argument. What the? What's this all about? Startled by Michael's angry voice, Dorothy came over. Mom, listen to this. Karen is being utterly unreasonable. My husband proudly admitted to his affair and claimed that my opposition to it was unreasonable, appealing to Dorothy. Even Dorothy, who's always lenient with her son, would surely take my side this time. How foolish I was to think so even for a moment. After hearing Michael's side, Dorothy said. That's Karen's fault. What? It's normal for a husband to have a mistress. It's narrow-minded not to accept that. Think about Michael, who you're blaming. I was speechless at Dorothy's statement. Wouldn't Dorothy dislike being cheated on herself? Dorothy, would you be okay if your late husband had a mistress? Since you're a failure as a wife, it's only pitiful if Michael doesn't have a mistress. I was dumbfounded by Dorothy's statement. And then, Michael said this to me. Exactly. I'm going on a trip abroad with her tomorrow. Don't slack off on the housework and chores while I'm gone. Michael, is that? Shut up. Who needs a sick woman anyway? I was speechless at Michael's words. I can no longer continue as his wife. But if we divorced, and Grace ended up staying in this house. The thought made me shudder. I must avoid that at all costs. However, the situation would take an unexpected turn. Please, let's get a divorce. I'm begging you. At dinner that day, I was begging to Michael. Mom. Glancing at Grace, who was staring at me in shock, I continued. I've endured for Grace's sake. But I can't forgive an affair. I'll take Grace and leave this house. Wait a minute. Grace is my granddaughter. If she's your granddaughter, why not have Michael's girlfriend bear one for you? Wait, Dad. Are you really having an affair? Grace. Don't be fooled by this woman. It's normal for a husband to have a mistress, and it's abnormal for a wife not to tolerate it. Grandma, please just be quiet for a moment. Even Dorothy fell silent when Grace firmly stood her ground. I won't pay any alimony. Even if you call it an affair, there's no evidence. You can't sue me. Michael's gleeful laughter brought my anger to a boiling point. But I couldn't afford to get emotional here. I had to make sure, at all costs, that Grace would come with me. I don't need alimony. But I'm taking Grace with me. And from now on, please stay out of our lives. Like a useless woman like you could support Grace. That's right. We're not giving Grace to you. I'll stay with Dad and Grandma. It'll probably be more convenient that way. What? Grace. Mom, you might be sick, right? If I go with you after the divorce, I'd just be a burden. Well. Grace, unlike your mother, you have a good head on your shoulders. Well said, Grace. Grace. I was stunned by Grace's words. But then, Grace whispered to me. Mom, escape while Dad is on his overseas trip. I'll handle the rest. Grace. It's okay. Everything will work out. I'll explain the details later. With that, Grace smiled. I nodded to Grace in agreement. After that, I took the opportunity to return to my parents' house while Michael and Dorothy were out. Michael called me several times to come back, but I ignored him. And when I went to the hospital for a re-examination, I found out that I had early-stage breast cancer. I reported this to Michael over the phone. Michael, it turns out I am sick. So, you were defective after all. Fine, let's get a divorce. Understood. But I'll be taking custody. You, being worthless, can't possibly support Grace. I couldn't respond to Michael's words. Grace will be fine even if she stays with Michael. We have a plan we've discussed together. If it succeeds, there won't be any problems, and I can live with Grace. That's right. I'm going on another trip abroad with my girlfriend, so you'll have to take care of the house. If you don't come, Grace will have to do the farm work alone. Mom's coming on the trip with us. I clenched my teeth and endured the anger. It's okay, our plan is progressing smoothly. But I was about to be hospitalized. I couldn't go back to Michael's family home. Would it be okay if my brother Edward went there instead? I need to be hospitalized. Useless wife. Fine, I'll make an exception. Thank you, Michael. I smiled to myself at Michael's words. With this, our plan will be successful. Thus, I divorced Michael while leaving Grace in his care. With the help of my parents, I managed to get through my treatment. A year has passed since then. I've managed to find a job and now live alone in an apartment near my parents' house. I haven't seen Grace for a year because I was hospitalized. I wonder if Grace is doing okay. As I murmured this, there was a loud knocking at the front door. Karen, you're in there, aren't you? Help, please, Karen. What? Michael, Dorothy. When I opened the door, there stood Michael and Dorothy, tears streaming down their faces. What do you want now? Ignoring my cold reception, the two of them started making a scene right at the entrance. Please, stop Grace. We were wrong, so please tell Grace not to sue us. What happened? And please, not here. We have neighbors. Oh, sorry. Yes, we went too far. The two of them said, looking embarrassed and shrugging their shoulders. Come in first. Then we'll talk. Michael and Dorothy hesitantly entered my apartment. And then, I was about to hear an astonishing story from the two of them. Grace has left home. What? And she's not listening to us about not suing us. Meaning? Well, here's what happened. They explained what had happened with Grace. Grace had left home with evidence of Michael's affair and a cash card in my name that Michael had hidden. So, where is Grace now? She's with Edward. Seriously? My brother Edward is a lawyer. It seemed that Grace had gone to consult with Edward about suing Michael for his affair. Have you had any contact from Edward or Grace? No. I haven't heard anything. Listen. If they say anything, make sure they don't sue us. Oh, okay. Remember that. That's your duty as a wife. But I'm already divorced from Michael. Really? Just when I thought I could start a new family with my girlfriend, Grace has to go and ruin everything. If Grace contacts you, make sure you tell her not to sue us. What happened to their submissive attitude just now? As soon as they realized I didn't know the situation, they reverted to their usual way of speaking to me. Hey. The train fare. What? We came all the way from afar, so it's only natural you pay for our transportation. Okay, got it. Fearing trouble from resisting, I offered $100 to the two of them. Michael and Dorothy snatched it and left. Mom. Are you doing okay? After they left, I received a call from Grace. The plan worked, didn't it? Yeah. I took the evidence of the affair and the cash card Dad had hidden in your name. Where are you now? I'm at Edward's place. When Edward saw the evidence of the affair I brought, he couldn't help but smile with satisfaction. Hearing Grace's cheerful voice made me burst into laughter as well. I never imagined you'd come up with something like this. Even when Edward and I looked for evidence of the affair a year ago, we couldn't find any. That's what I told you, right? Everything would work out. But how did you manage to gather the evidence? It was easy. Dad didn't put a lock on his phone. So I was able to secretly get hold of the correspondence and pictures with his mistress that would serve as evidence. But your dad and I are already divorced. I wonder if we can still demand alimony. I asked Edward about that too, and he said it's fine. There's a 3-year statute of limitations after the divorce. And as long as it hasn't passed, it's entirely possible to claim alimony. I see. So that's why you stayed with Dad, to help out with this. I didn't want to see Mom suffer because of Dad. I wanted to make him suffer so he'd learn his lesson. Otherwise, he'll never reflect on his affair. I understand. I won't let your efforts go to waste. Indeed, Grace had stayed with Michael to gather evidence of his affair and reclaim the savings Michael had taken from me. Now we just have to finish this off. Right. But this was the beginning of a new challenge. After that, I consulted with Edward and prepared to file for alimony. When we sent the demand for alimony through a certified letter, Michael called me in a rage. What do you mean by demanding alimony? Don't mess with me. I'm sorry, but considering Grace's future and everything, I thought it best to settle things with you. That's why I had the certified letter sent. What do you mean, settle things? And where's Grace? I don't see why I need to tell you that. I had become able to firmly respond to Michael's yelling. So, I'll be expecting the alimony payment, thank you. There's no way I'm paying. I'll sue you for being a worthless wife. Be ready for that. Michael said that, but I had already anticipated such a move. Edward and I decided to also claim alimony from Michael's mistress. This is legally permissible, as the responsibility for alimony due to affairs and cheating also falls on the partner involved. Michael's mistress was living with her parents, so the certified letter was undoubtedly seen by her family as well. Ladies and gentlemen, you can imagine what happened next. I'm truly sorry. The mistress contacted Edward's law office in tears after reading the certified letter. Her parents were furious and told her to use all her savings to repay the alimony. She begged Edward for a reduction in the amount. Of course, he refused. Edward managed to get the mistress's parents to agree to pay the full amount of alimony. As for Michael, he was left to walk the path of ruin on his own. Though he blustered about suing me, he couldn't find a lawyer, and his plan fell through. It seems his relationship with the mistress also turned sour because of the alimony. And Dorothy? She was so mentally affected by the whole situation that she suffered a cerebral hemorrhage and became in need of care. Now, I must tell you what happened to Grace and me. Mom, I'm off. Take care. Grace is currently working part-time while attending a night high school from my apartment to save up for college. The alimony will be used for Grace's educational expenses. Of course, Michael has contacted me several times asking for reconciliation. You guys. I'll forgive you, so come back. Otherwise, you'll regret it. Every time he threatened me like this, I recorded the call and consulted with Edward, my lawyer brother. We filed a report for being threatened. As expected, Michael also tried to contact Grace. I'm your guardian, you know. Do you have any idea what happens when you disrespect me? Yeah. I'm glad you're not my guardian. I wouldn't want to live with a crappy dad like you. What? What do you mean by that? When I talked to you about the custody, you said, do whatever you want. So, I had Mom become my guardian. But Dad. You were always off on trips abroad with your mistress, hardly listening to what Edward had to say. I won't accept that. Don't mess with me. Then, why don't you check the family registry? You'll probably find that my last name has been changed to Mom's maiden name. With that, Grace hung up the phone. Undeterred, Michael kept calling, threatening, if you don't give me the custody, I won't let you off easy. As a result, Michael was investigated by the police on suspicion of making threats. Being his first offense, he was not prosecuted. However, rumors that he was arrested by the police have spread around the neighborhood, and he's been living uncomfortably ever since. Since then, there's been no contact from Michael. I had endured for years for the sake of my daughter, but I never imagined that she would take revenge on her cheating ex-husband for me. I hope to continue supporting each other and living together with my kind-hearted daughter. Mom, thank you for always protecting me. It's me who should be thanking you. I had no idea you'd become so dependable. You've grown up before I knew it, becoming such a kind person. I'm so happy. Now, it's my turn to work hard for her sake. Annie, you are really cute, aren't you? As the door opened, the voice became clear. And upon hearing that name from Jason's mouth, I froze. I wondered who it was, but once I heard the name, it was indeed my sister Annie's voice. Jason foolishly called out Annie's name over and over again. I was trembling but then had a realization. I had to capture this moment on video as evidence. I made sure to record it on my cell phone and quietly left the scene. After a while, the two of them came out of the bedroom. Seeing me, they turned pale, and I said, "Oh yeah, I sent the video of the two of you to Keith. Anyway, let's discuss what to do next among the four of us soon." At my words, Annie's face turned even paler. What? What do you mean? What I mean is exactly what I said. I've kept the video as evidence. What have you done? As I held up my cell phone, my sister became hysterical. And then, she lunged at me. My name is Marissa. I'm a 45-year-old housewife. I have 2 boys in the 6th grade. They are twins. I've heard that twins run in families. Interestingly, I'm also a twin. I have a twin sister named Annie. Being identical twins, we didn't really have a sisterly bond. Rather, we were more like rivals. Even if we weren't twins, I grew up constantly being compared to Annie. Before long, I developed a strong complex towards her, and she too prioritized beating me above all else. Annie was always the cute and friendly child. On the other hand, I was shy and introverted. And because I was also shy with strangers, everyone was drawn to Annie when we first met. Although we were rivals, I loved Annie. I adored her, who was always smiling and popular. But it seemed Annie wasn't feeling the same way. We used to play a lot together when we were in elementary school, but I always ended up with the roles nobody wanted. Marissa, you're it. During games of tag, when nobody wanted to be it, I was always forced into the role. Even when one of my friends suggested deciding by rock paper scissors, Annie would pressure me with, "You want to be it, right, Marissa?" Not wanting to be disliked by Annie or excluded by my peers, all I could do was nod in agreement. Annie's behavior wasn't limited to playtime. It was in the 6th grade. When we were deciding roles for a school play. We were going to perform Snow White, and I, not being much of an actress, hoped to be the narrator. However, I caught a cold and had to miss school on the day roles were assigned. "You want to be the narrator, right?" I'll tell Mr. Daniel for you. Annie said that, so I trusted her and felt relieved. But when I got better and went back to school, I found out I had been cast as the lead role. Why am I the lead? I was shocked and asked my friend. Then, my friend uttered unbelievable words. Annie said that Marissa wanted to play the lead role. What? I didn't say that. But it's already been decided. It seemed that no one in our adolescence, at the age of 6th graders, wanted to play the role of Snow White due to shyness. That's why I, who was absent, was chosen for the role. Mr. Daniel also found it strange that I, usually so reserved, would want to play the lead role. Annie, did Marissa really say that? Mr. Daniel even confirmed with her. It's true. She wants to do it but is too shy to volunteer, so please let this be an opportunity for Marissa to take the lead. But Annie recommended me in a way that made it seem like she was doing it for my sake. I was in tears, insisting that I couldn't do it and didn't want to. However, everyone's roles had already been decided. Chided by Mr. Daniel and our parents, I somehow managed to muster the effort. Thanks to that, the play was a great success. Mr. Daniel, our parents, and my friends all praised me, saying, "You did great." Among them, only Annie looked at me with displeasure. Anyone could have done that much. It's stupid to get all excited about such a thing. And so, she began to speak harshly. It was then that I truly realized Annie hated me. After that, Annie stopped inviting me to play. At first, I was sad, but then I realized it was better not to be pushed into unpleasant roles. And I started to make good friends and have a good time. In middle school, many people didn't even know Annie and I were twins. We were that different and hardly spoke at school. I made sure we weren't in the same classes and enjoyed my time, but one day, as exams approached and I was studying in my room, Annie came to talk to me. Studying? Have you decided which high school you're applying to? Yeah, I'm thinking of going to C High School. C High School is the closest school to my house. It has a competitive entry score of over 60. I had been studying hard for 3 years, wanting to get in. But Annie, who knew nothing about it, laughed when I told her it was my first choice. C High School? That's impossible. Why don't you just come to B High School with me? You probably wouldn't even have to study much to get in there. She said. Annie always tried to control me. But I didn't want her to dictate my choice of high school. For the first time, I stood up to her. I've decided to go to C High School. You can't know if it's impossible or not, Annie. If you don't want to study, that's fine. But don't get in my way, I retorted. I quickly looked away and returned to my textbook. What? How dare you speak to your sister like that? Angered by my response, Annie grabbed my textbook and threw it on the floor. What are you doing? Even if you study, it's useless, ugly. You're destined to be my slave and go to B High School with me, she sneered. That day, we got into a physical fight. Our parents rushed in upon hearing the commotion and separated us, but my textbook was already torn to pieces. More than anything, my heart was shattered by hearing Annie's true feelings about me. To her, I was just a convenient target for her to push around. I realized she truly thought of me as a slave. But I didn't give up and continued to study. Luckily, my parents contacted the school on my behalf, and I got a new textbook. With their support, Annie no longer interfered with my studies, and I was able to immerse myself and eventually got accepted into my desired school. True to her word, Annie barely studied and went on to B High School. Thus, we went our separate ways for high school and later on to different universities. And then we both found jobs. As an adult, I started living on my own. And that's when I met a man. He was Jason, my husband. Jason and I were hired at the same time and came from similar backgrounds. Feeling a connection, we started seeing each other, and he asked me out. Actually, I like you, Marissa. I'd be happy if you'd go out with me, he said. I was utterly surprised. I had feelings for Jason too. But I didn't have the courage to say such things out loud. I'm not cute like Annie, and since I hardly had any romantic experiences during my school days, I couldn't believe that he felt the same way about me. I'm happy. If I can be your girlfriend, I'd be delighted. I was over the moon with the presence of my first ever boyfriend. Since starting to date Jason, I devoted myself to him, cooking meals and even packing lunches for him. Jason also started coming over to my place, and we began to spend our days as if we were semi-living together. Marissa, I'll cook dinner today. But it wasn't just me doing things for him, Jason was also cooperative with household chores. Doing housework together was fun, and I started to think that we could make a good married couple if it were with Jason. And 3 years after we started dating, we decided to get married. I was very happy and delighted about it, but there was one thing that worried me. You have a twin sister, right, Marissa? I'd like to meet her, Jason said. I had told him about being a twin during our 3 years of dating, but he had never met Annie. In fact, I hadn't even told her about having a boyfriend. Since our big fight in middle school, there had been a deep rift between us. Yeah, that's right. But if we were going to get married, it was inevitable that Annie and Jason would meet. The thought of how Annie might scorn me was depressing, but I decided it was time to introduce them. What? Marriage? When did this happen? Annie, whom I haven't spoken on the phone for a long time, seemed surprised by my news. I had told our parents, but it seemed Annie hadn't heard yet. It was news to her. Yeah. And I want to introduce you to the man I'm going to marry. Well, I'm busy, you know. But if you insist, I guess I can meet him. As usual, Annie was condescending, but I pleaded with her to make time. Annie was still like a child in some ways. I figured I had to be the adult and humble myself. So, we went back home to coincide with Annie's day off. Jason suggested we all have a meal together at a restaurant, so we made plans to meet there. And on the day, we went to the restaurant. But even when it was time, Annie hadn't shown up. Annie's late. She said she'd be here on time. Sorry, Jason. It's totally fine. I'm sure she'll show up eventually, let's just wait a bit. Both my parents and I were considerate of Jason, and I felt sorry for him. And 15 minutes after the promised time, Annie showed up in a flashy dress. Sorry, did you wait? We did wait. And what's with that outfit? Well, I thought it was kind of like an introductory meeting, so I figured I should dress up. I was flabbergasted by her. And it wasn't just me. My parents could only give a wry smile. If she knew it was an introductory meeting, I wished she wouldn't be late without contacting us. Especially the reason for being late was just to dress up. As an adult, I found it questionable. But since it was a special occasion, I swallowed my words. Then, Annie, Jason, and I introduced each other. Wow, Marissa, you snagged a handsome one. Working at the same place means he must be earning well. Annie kept making rude remarks to Jason, whom she was meeting for the first time. What do you usually do on your days off? With Marissa. Not that. Before you started dating Marissa. She bombarded Jason with questions as if it were a mixer. Despite my parents repeatedly trying to stop her, Annie wouldn't stop talking, saying, "It's fine. I'm just curious about who Marissa's husband-to-be is." Jason, ever the gentleman, assured me, "Don't worry about it," and continued to engage with Annie. The dinner was so exhausting that by the end, I was sighing with fatigue. But it didn't end there. Annie is an interesting person, quite the opposite of you, Marissa. I always think we're quite the unalike twins. When I responded with a wry smile, Jason said, "Maybe you should take a leaf out of Annie's book. She's always smiling, good at conversation. And cute." If I had met Annie first. I was taken aback. I had told him about my difficulties with Annie. This comment, knowing that, was more shocking than infuriating. Then why don't you marry Annie? She did say she found you handsome. When I retorted, Jason quickly apologized, looking flustered. Sorry. It was just a joke. I'm glad I met you, Marissa, and I don't have any special feelings for Annie. Then you shouldn't make jokes that put me down and praise Annie. It was just a joke. Jason apologized. It was a shock, but I wasn't about to call off an engagement over it. Just when I thought it would be enough if he understood, Jason said, "But Annie is a good person. Being jealous of your sister is unseemly. We should all get along as a family. We're adults now, it's different from when we were kids." I had my reservations, but I knew that deep down, my parents wanted Annie and me to get along. However, I wanted Jason to be on my side. Why was he trying to push me closer to Annie? But it's not like there would be many occasions for us to interact anyway. Arguing seemed too bothersome, so for the time being, I just nodded along to Jason's words. A few days later, I received a message from Annie. "Jason's too good for you, isn't he? Should I take him off your hands?" I was chilled by her message. "What are you talking about?" When I replied in disbelief, she immediately called me. "I mean exactly what I said. It's unbelievable that someone as dull as you would get married before me." Annie laughed and belittled me over the phone. "He's well educated and has a high income. Hand him over to me. We're twins, after all, we've always shared everything since we were kids. Don't be ridiculous." I yelled at Annie. I couldn't stand her treating Jason like an object, nor the absurd claim that we've always shared everything. I had always been the one stuck with the unpleasant things for Annie. That night, I told Jason about it and warned him to be wary of Annie. But Jason seemed amused and brushed off my concerns. "It's nice to be so well liked. Don't worry, Annie isn't serious. It's not a laughing matter. You never know what Annie might do." "You doubt my feelings?" I said it's fine, so it will be fine. Jason, who had been such a wonderful person, seemed to change after meeting Annie. He was determined to affirm everything about her, simply because she was my sister. Other than that, he was the same wonderful partner as before. But it was frustrating how he changed whenever Annie was involved. "Don't worry so much." But as Jason said, as long as he wasn't swayed, Annie couldn't do anything. Being disturbed by Annie's words meant I didn't fully trust Jason. So I was told. Indeed, that was probably true. I decided to trust Jason and ignore Annie's words. Annie continued to send me snide messages, but I didn't respond. Fortunately, Annie didn't do anything to us, and I hoped we would become a wonderful family, enjoying a happy marriage. Years passed. When I was over 40, my parents informed me that Annie had gotten married. By then, I had blocked her and we weren't in contact. Occasionally, we'd see each other at our parents' house, but every encounter with Annie resulted in verbal abuse. Approaching 40 and still unmarried, Annie began to take out her frustrations on me, and it seemed she was avoiding me too. Given her age and difficult personality, I didn't think she would marry. But it seemed she had found someone, and I genuinely felt happy for her. When Marissa got married, I said some terrible things, but I only realized it after getting married myself. Annie then apologized to me through our parents. From then on, we started to communicate again. Indeed, Annie had changed and become much calmer, almost like the sister I used to love. It felt like Annie had returned to being the sister I once cherished. The thought that we could share laughter again at this age brought me immense joy. Annie introduced me to the man who would become her husband. He's about 5 years older than us, and his name is Keith. He seems to really cherish Annie, which is reassuring. Annie and I have gotten closer since we both got married. Our parents are very happy to see us sisters getting along well. I want to make up for the time we spent apart. It was a few years after I started feeling this way. I felt ill at work and had to leave early. I wanted to inform Jason, but he was out on visits to clients, so I left a message with his colleague. I went straight home. Upon entering, I immediately sensed something was off in the house. It felt like someone was inside, even though it should have been empty. Could it be a burglar? That's what I thought impulsively and entered the house quietly. Listening carefully, I could hear noises and voices coming from the bedroom. I stood in front of the bedroom, holding my breath, when I heard Jason's voice from inside. But I couldn't bring myself to speak. My blood ran cold at the sound of his voice. It was unmistakably the voice of someone in the throes of passion. The creaking of the bed further confirmed my suspicions. Even without seeing, it was clear what was happening, and my hands trembled. However, if Jason was cheating, I needed to catch him in the act. With that thought, I quietly opened the door, cell phone in hand, trying not to be noticed. But peering into the bedroom only revealed a more shocking truth. "Annie, you are really cute, aren't you?" The voice became clearer as the door opened. I was paralyzed at the mention of that name by Jason. Thinking about it, the woman's voice was indeed my sister Annie's. Jason, foolishly, kept calling out Annie's name over and over. Trembling, I captured the scene on video before quietly leaving. I sat in the dining room for a while, stunned. I was supposed to have come home early due to feeling ill, but the shock made me forget all about it. I sat in front of my cell phone in a daze, waiting for this nightmare to end. A few minutes later, the bedroom door opened. "All right, I'm heading back to work, make sure to lock up." "Okay. It'd be nice if we could live together soon." Hearing this, I hurriedly stood up. Noticing the noise, Jason and Annie and I locked eyes in the hallway. "Marissa. What are you doing here?" Jason exclaimed, turning pale. "What do you mean, what am I doing here? This is my house, isn't it? More importantly, why is Annie here? Aren't you both supposed to be at work?" Annie looked away for a moment but then smirked as if defiant. "Why do you ask? You knew, didn't you? Do you want me to say it out loud?" "Annie." Jason tried to stop her, but Annie wouldn't be stopped. "I've always hated how you look down on me. Neither happiness nor Jason suits you. I'll take them all for myself." With that, Annie declared. I smiled at her words. "Is that so? Then, I'll give Jason to you, Marissa. But don't think you can take away my happiness." Perhaps displeased by my retort, Annie shot me a glare with an annoyed expression. Facing her, I continued. "Exactly. I sent Keith the video of the two of you. Anyway, let's discuss what to do next, all four of us, sometime soon." Annie's face turned ashen instantly. "What do you mean?" "Just what I said. If you want Jason, Keith should know about this, right? What have you done?" Annie became hysterical, lunging at me. "Annie, calm down." "How can I possibly calm down?" Jason hurried to stop her. But Annie showed no signs of calming down. At that moment, Annie's phone in her bag rang. She froze at the sound. Looks like it might be Keith calling. Annie stood there, as pale as a ghost, hesitantly staring at her bag. But there was no sign she was going to answer her phone. In the silent room, only the sound of a cell phone echoed. After a while, my phone started to ring. "See? Since you didn't pick up, he's calling me. Marissa. I'm truly sorry. Please forgive Annie. Can you please cover for her with Keith? If things continue this way, Annie might lose everything." Jason started to speak as if he was defending Annie. Next to him, Annie began to cry bitterly. She was acting like the tragic heroine of a story. What Jason said made sense. In fact, Keith is Annie's husband and also the president of the company she works for. If he found out about Annie's infidelity, it could lead to divorce, and she might not be able to continue working at his company. Especially since it's during working hours. It's a bleak outlook, but she doesn't deserve any sympathy. She knew what she was risking when she did it. "I can't cover for her." "That's what I said." "That's too harsh." Jason continued to try to defend Annie. I was so irritated by his words that I glared at him. "Do you think this is the time to be worried about others? Annie isn't the only one who could lose her family and job." At my shout, Jason flinched. He seemed to have a sudden realization, breaking out in a cold sweat. He must have understood the meaning of my words. "Just so you know, I've sent your department and name, along with the video, to the company's main email address." "What have you done?" The call from Keith had already ended at some point. Jason and Annie remained standing there, faces filled with despair. After kicking them out, I called Keith. "Sorry to bother you at work. You're calling about the video, right?" "Yeah." "It's Jason, right?" "Yes." I quietly replied to Keith's gentle voice. "I'm sorry for asking you to do this." Then, he said that. Actually, Keith had consulted me because he thought something was off with Annie. It might have been possible for the old Annie, but the current Annie truly loved Keith. I didn't think she would cheat, and I had told Keith as much. But if Annie ever did something, he had asked me to get evidence. That's why I think I was able to film it calmly. Please don't apologize. I'm glad I could keep evidence of Jason's infidelity. If you hadn't asked me to, I probably wouldn't have thought to remain calm like that. I told Keith that. It would be a lie to say I wasn't shocked. It's shocking enough that it was just an affair, let alone with my own sister. I was the one who wanted to go mad. My sons will be home soon, so let's talk another day. I told Keith that and hung up. Tears flowed uncontrollably, but for my sons and my own future, I had to be strong. That day, I went through my usual routines as always. And when the boys had gone to bed, Jason finally came home. "You're late. Were you with Annie?" When I said that, Jason clearly showed his displeasure and retorted. "It's your fault I was called into HR. They said my punishment will be decided later. What are you going to do about this?" I couldn't help but laugh at Jason trying to play the victim when he was the one at fault. Crying over someone like him was a waste of time. There's nothing I can do about it. Do as you please. You realize what you're saying? If we get divorced, I'll take custody of the boys. Are you still going to go through with it? I was appalled by Jason's statement, which sounded like he was using our sons as leverage. What are you talking about? You think you'll get custody after likely losing your job? Divorce is a done deal. Stop talking nonsense and keep your foolishness to your actions only. Jason was speechless, as he should be. Naturally. Returning home during work hours for an affair, such a scumbag would undoubtedly be fired. Does he still not understand the foolishness of his actions? If so, that's incredibly stupid. I'll leave tomorrow. Wait. We could still make amends. Can't you forgive just one affair? Now, trying a more submissive approach, Jason began to apologize. Just once. I repeated his words. According to Keith, Annie had been acting strange for several months. Keith is mostly out on sales visits, so Jason might have been returning home during the day. Just once. Jason weakly responded to my question, avoiding eye contact. He had shifty eyes, too. His lack of confidence in his answer made it clear it wasn't just once. I found it pointless to press further and ended the conversation. The next day, I told my sons about Jason's affair. They're already in 6th grade. They should understand that hurting and betraying others is wrong. Feeling sorry for exposing them to this during such a sensitive period, I apologized. But they wanted to talk alone, just 2 of them, and went to their room. Soon after, they came out with their bags and said, "Mom, we're on your side." I couldn't help but cry. They comforted me with smiles as I apologized again. Then, we went to my parents' house. My parents were speechless when they heard about Annie and Jason's actions. They had been happy that the sisters were getting along well again, but my mother apologized to me with tears, saying, "Annie hasn't changed." Has she? I'm sorry for always making you endure. Cut ties with Annie and Jason. We'll keep our interactions with Annie to a minimum. My dad said this, and it was a weight off my chest. From that day on, I commuted to work from my parents' house. Jason, presumably suspended, didn't come to the office but kept calling me repeatedly. I ignored him, and eventually, he started sending messages day and night. "I love you, Marissa. Let's live happily as a family of 4 again." I was out of my mind. I was just deceived by that woman. "I don't know how to live without you." I was almost fooled for a moment, but my son's laughter at the messages made me realize their absurdity. But I couldn't ignore him forever. Eventually, I'd have to meet him for official divorce. I arranged to meet Jason on a day off, and we decided to meet at a cafe. Choosing a cafe over going back home was Keith's advice. He said that being in a public place would help keep the conversation calm. Keith and Annie also joined us at the cafe, and Annie looked like a completely different person, having lost a lot of weight over the past few days. She must have fallen out of favor with Keith. Serves her right. All right, Annie and Jason, please sign this divorce oaths. It seemed Annie was also reluctant to divorce. To the 2 hesitant to sign, Keith said, "Keith, this is a misunderstanding. It's fine if you 2 want to divorce, but we're not going to." "Are you still saying that?" "Neither I nor the boys consider you as our family anymore," I said to Jason, who keeps making futile attempts. Keith sighed deeply and said, "You can go to court if you want, but it's clear you'll lose. Won't it be hard to pay for the legal fees on top of the compensation?" "Compensation? Of course. You both betrayed your families. Annie to Marissa and me, and Jason also to Marissa and me. You'll have to pay a proper compensation. Annie started trembling in silence. Her silence and gauntness now made sense as the reasons for her behavior. How am I supposed to pay? I might even lose my job. Jason began to argue, turning pale. You brought this on yourself. Besides, you'll have to pay child support for both children. Oh yeah, Annie, I said. At my words, Annie flinched and her shoulders shook. You said you wanted to live together, right? You're welcome to marry and live in that house. I laughed out loud. Make sure you take care of the mortgage too, okay? Jason was startled. He must have forgotten about the mortgage. The two of them sat in front of two divorce oaths, sweating profusely and silent, with colorless expressions. Afterwards, introduced by Keith to a lawyer named Oliver, we were able to successfully claim alimony and child support and finalize our divorce. Despite his initial resistance to divorce, Jason proposed to Annie almost immediately after it was finalized. I knew he had always been fond of Annie. I wonder when his affair turned serious. Hearing that, I couldn't help but feel incredibly pathetic. On the other hand, Annie, who was genuinely in love with Keith, the company president, was discarded by him and, as expected, lost her job too. Despite her deep affection for Keith, why did she end up in such a situation with Jason? I was left with lingering questions, so I asked Keith. Then, Keith hesitantly began to speak. Actually, a few months ago, she started complaining about you. What? Saying that it's extravagant to be married and have children when you're useless. Could it really be because of that? Though it seemed unlikely, considering Annie's personality, it wasn't impossible. But the thought that she would go to such lengths just to set me up sent shivers down my spine. I talked to you because I thought something was off and I was worried you might be in danger. But I never imagined it would lead to this with Jason. I'm really sorry. Keith said, looking genuinely apologetic. It's okay. It's all in the past now. Besides, Jason is also to blame for giving in to Annie's advances. And with that, the conversation ended. Keith and I have agreed to keep in touch for consultations about alimony and legal matters. According to him, the two, burdened by a significant amount of compensation, ended up marrying and living together. Annie, abandoned even by her parents, had nowhere else to go. Having lost her family, she reluctantly accepted Jason's proposal. The following is what I heard from Oliver. Annie seems unable to accept that she was forced to divorce Keith and marry Jason, whom she doesn't love. Because of me. Oliver, who gets verbally abused every time he calls her, can only respond with a wry smile. Though I feel sorry for Oliver, he has been a great support to me, possibly due to Keith's influence, and I'm truly grateful. It seems I'll still need to rely on him for a while to make the alimony calls, and I'll likely continue to need his help in the future. 5 years have passed since then. The alimony and child support payments have been coming in regularly, and my emotional wounds have largely healed. Just as the divorce turmoil had settled and I was getting back to my normal life, I received a call from Oliver after a long time. Annie says she has something to discuss with you. I refused. Whatever she wanted to talk about, it would likely just end with her berating me and using me as a vent for her frustration. I will never trust or forgive Annie again. I conveyed this to Oliver and asked him to decline on my behalf. However, Annie insisted it was urgent, and Jason also requested a meeting as a favor. Their persistence eventually wore me down, and I reluctantly agreed. But I certainly didn't have the courage to meet them alone, so, feeling somewhat guilty, I contacted Keith after a long time. He graciously agreed to accompany me, and I found myself meeting with the two of them after many years. Jason and Annie sat in the cafe with serious expressions. Upon seeing me, Annie's face relaxed slightly. What's this about? Why did you call me here? When I asked, Annie spoke up. Actually, I've developed renal failure and need to undergo dialysis. I was taken aback. It's your fault. No, it's both of your faults that Annie ended up like this. She couldn't sleep without drinking. And yet she had to work because of the alimony. You two are to blame for her health issues. Jason said this indignantly, but I thought it was their own doing. Keith seemed to agree, as he looked dismayed and let out a small sigh. So what? We're not reducing or refunding the alimony. Be grateful we agreed to a payment plan. I stood my ground, and Annie began to plead through her tears. I'll make sure to pay the alimony. But please, I need a kidney. What? I exclaimed in shock at her extreme request. You can't be serious. As I refused, Jason said. You were born as twins with Annie for this reason. You have a duty to help her. What are you talking about? Who's been causing me trouble all this time without ever helping me once? Why are you bringing up such trivial matters when Annie's life is at stake? Jason raised his voice in anger. Annie, with tears streaming down her face, pleads as she utters words of apology. Jason berates me as if I were a monster, demanding a transplant in a manner that feels almost like a threat. Just when it seemed as though I was the one at fault, Keith spoke up. If she needs dialysis, then she should get dialysis. Do you have any idea how hard dialysis is? And do you know how difficult a transplant is? Why should she risk her life for Annie? With that, both of them fell silent. I was relieved by Keith's timely intervention and took a moment to catch my breath. Besides, Annie. You kept saying that Marissa was useless, didn't you? Isn't it too convenient to seek help only when you're in trouble? But that's... Annie, you destroyed Marissa's happy life. Marissa doesn't have any obligation to save your life. Annie broke down crying, and Jason was at a loss for words. They both must have thought I would definitely give them my kidney. If I had been alone, maybe they could have persuaded me. Once again, Keith saved me. Well then, take care. Oh, and don't forget this month's payment. With that, I left the table. Even if they call me inhuman or a demon, I can't forgive them. I don't know what kind of life they will lead from now on, but I hope they never forget what they did and reflect on it. It seems Jason and Annie were making a living with part-time jobs, but with Annie unable to work properly, their financial situation is dire. But that's their karma. All the consequences of their own actions. Their atonement won't end until they pay the alimony in full. That's what I believe. I continue to live happily with my parents and sons. My parents don't even mention Annie's name anymore. But they seem happy to see the twin grandsons getting along, something Annie and I couldn't achieve. It's heartwarming to see the bond my sons have, which Annie and I lacked. Keith and I have kept in touch since then. He's a genuinely kind person, always willing to listen and help. It seems he has feelings for me, but I'm not ready to respond to him yet. I don't want to disturb my sons any further. But in a few years, when my sons are adults, I hope to have the chance to think about my own happiness again.